Welcome to the Reschool'd Podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts, AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon. Hey everyone, we're back. And if this is the first time you've heard us, we are the Reschool'd Podcast. We're the show that discusses all the things that schools may not have prepared you for. I am your host, or at least one of them. I'm AJ, and across from me, my friend, co-host, Jason. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing great, AJ.
You know, I was going to give the listeners a quick update on what happened last week. I told you my wife was cooking or baking a cake, and it was phenomenal. I
was going to ask you, how did that go down?
It went down very fast. It was gone not too, far after she made it. It was great. It was a vanilla, just a regular vanilla cake. I'm not somebody that my mom, when I was growing up, taught me why, I don't know, but I do know, taught me not to like chocolate. She taught me at a very young age not to like chocolate. She would show me chocolate and she goes, "This is yucky." And so I would grow up saying that was yucky, and to the point where I thought raisins were chocolate. So when you had oatmeal raisin cookies, I wouldn't even eat that because I thought it was chocolate. And to this day, I don't eat chocolate. And my wife gives me all kind of crap for this because I didn't know it until I was I didn't know until I was after college, in college. My favorite cake, the cake that I asked my mom to bake me every birthday, was red velvet cake.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that red velvet cake actually had cocoa powder in it. It actually had chocolate flavoring to it.
Huh.
Because every red velvet cake she ever made me was simply a vanilla cake with red food color.
Oh, okay.
So I was being bamboozled, thinking that this was what a red velvet cake was, until I went to a restaurant and ordered red velvet cake, and I thought, ugh, this is not red velvet cake, until my mom actually had to break it down and say, "Hey, this is what I've been doing to swindle you."
I'm still hung up on teaching a kid that chocolate is nasty. That seems like cruel and unusual punishment, man.
Well, she said it was.
What happened when you watched Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory?
She said it was. Well, I didn't want you to have a sweet tooth, and eat too much of it is going to make you gain a lot of weight. So I ate everything else in the house and gained weight anyway. So kind of alternate plan. Well, on today's episode, we are going to be talking about studying tips. Last week we talked about note-taking tips. This one we're going to be talking about studying tips, and there's obviously going to be some overlap because I think they work hand in hand. I mean, I think if you were to talk to any professor out there, they would say that they work hand in hand. But we're going to be specifically looking at the tips and tricks to help you study. You can also look at it as tips to help you get the most out of your test grades, maybe. So that's what we're really going to be focusing in on today. Jason, are you good for that?
Absolutely. I'm excited about this one. Note-taking was great, and I enjoyed talking about that last episode, but just getting into the study habits, how you transmit that material to your memory, that was huge for me. It was transitional in my career as a student. Mine happened a little earlier. It happened in high school, so I was pretty good at it all the way through college, but I did get a rude awakening in a few classes that required different types. So I'm excited to talk all about this.
Well, if you remember, our opening quick question was that grade the statement, where we said grade yourself on your note-taking skills last week, and I gave myself an F. This week is going to be even lower. So,
well, before we get into grading ourselves, let's remind everybody to visit Reschool'd.com. That's Reschool with a D, not an ED. Check out our episodes, the series that we have forming. Visit us on our social media profiles. That's Reschool'd Pod on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. Also, remember to like us on your favorite podcasting platform, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Google. Get notifications when we have new episodes.
Yeah, and again, with the tips and tricks series, we are going to be posting on our socials our tips and tricks for each of these. So for note-taking, for studying, and so on. So be sure to keep up with that too if you want the hard copy version of these. So today's quick question, or grade the statement as it may be, is grade yourself on your studying skills in college.
I'm going to give myself an A- to A.
Good grief, man. You're killing me. My GPA on this podcast is just terrible.
I was a diligent studier. Like I say, oftentimes if you're not the sharpest knife in the drawer, then you have to make up with it in other ways. So hard work will overcome any lack of natural ability. I'm a testament to that. So
see, I'm on the strategy side.
Yeah.
I think strategy will compensate for some of those deficiencies that you have. But
You
I wasn't
use
even the
tools you
sharpest
have,
knife.
right?
I wasn't even in the drawer. So I would give myself, before going to college, I would give my studying a 0. So
Wow.
like a F minus. Because again, I just didn't have to do it. Now with note taking, I gave myself a little bit of credit and gave myself an F because anybody can write down something on a sheet of paper. I mean, I had a little bit of it, but when it come to studying, I didn't have any background whatsoever. Like the last time that I remember studying from pretty much late middle school through high school and before I got into college, the last memories I had was my dad sitting down with me and doing like spelling test studying where he would call out the word and I would spell it. And that was the last things I remember. And it wasn't because they didn't offer. I mean, obviously they would love to. I just never asked because I felt like I can do it on my own. And my grades proved that I was doing well enough that I didn't need to study. But boy, when I got into college, that everything changed. I mean,
Sure.
I needed to know how to study. And that was probably the one thing I regretted most when I got into college was the fact that I did not know how to study. So again, I went back and tried to figure out ways, talk to people, talk to my mentor, and figured out ways that would improve my studying. And even to this day, it's still nowhere close to what it needs to be. I would give myself, by the time I graduated college, I would say my studying skills was probably about a C minus. So at least I was passing. But I learned, it wasn't until I actually started teaching to where I learned studying patterns. Because one thing, I don't know about you, but for me, I remember that first semester I started teaching, the one thing I didn't want to happen was somebody asked me a question I didn't know the answer to. Now that's inevitably going to
Right.
happen, but in my head, I didn't want that to happen. So I would go through the stuff and I studied it. And when I was studying it, I studied it in a completely different way than I studied it while I was a student. And man, that changed everything.
That's an important learning point. Looking at things from different ways is probably the single most effective way to learn something, to try and learn it in different ways. And that's why they have that old saying that you really don't know something until you can teach it to somebody else.
I did not know
Right.
that was a saying, but I say that all the time to my students. When they say, how do I study this? I say, study it as if you had to teach it.
Yeah. I mean, it is a common refrain. I've heard it
I
in a
had no
number
idea.
of
Maybe that's where I
cases.
got that from.
Yeah, and so and that's just because we have to look at it from so many different angles. We have to present it. In the Army, they always told us for communication, and when I later studied communication in business school, this turns out it was a readily accepted theory. You just didn't hear that before, but was tell somebody what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them.
Holy
Right,
crap.
and by the time oh yeah, everything, any briefing you do. Here's what we're going to go over. This is what it's going to be about. These are the points we're going to cover. This is it. Everybody ready for this? Now here's what it is. And then you go through it point by point, explaining it to whatever ability you have. And so an after action review on this. What we said was this, 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 and this. Your takeaway should be this, 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 and
That
this.
is
Right? It
awesome.
was standard practice. And what it was trying to do is get at it from anybody's point of view. So the preface there, right, of giving somebody an idea of what they were going to hear, help them start to form an idea, right, a pre-structure. Then when you actually told them, some people already had an understanding of it. Some people, that's where they really internalized. And then some people, it was afterwards, right? So anyway, it's just looking at it from different points of view, and teaching something to somebody really requires that. So I'll stand by that is a good skill to have.
That's awesome to hear because, even when you're saying that from a studying perspective, like that's something that I can take into my class to be able to go into class and say, okay, this is what we're going to talk about today, then talk about it and then end it with this is what we talked about. And that's something that, naturally we focus, at least me specifically, I focus in on that middle section of this is what we're talking about, but I don't give the preface and I don't give, I kind of give the roundabout ending, but I think that first part is a very important part to it.
Yeah. I mean, something for you to try, but also for, our students out there from their point of view when we talk about study habits, right? It may give them some insight into try to look at it from this way. Maybe try skimming the entire chapter first, right? Maybe try reading through the headings. Maybe try, we'll talk about some different techniques here, but as long as you try different things, It'll help you land in the type of class that you're taking. And granted, mathematics can be extremely different from literature, right?
Yes.
You're going to have to figure out what works. So trying different approaches to it, different tacks will help. There's no question.
Well, let's get into the main topic. And the first question that comes to mind is, what do we mean when we say study?
Well, in my mind, it's that process of saying, here's information. I need to bring that into my head so that I can recall it and that I can use it to whatever degree or extent necessary. Some things are foundational and you won't be able to use that until you have a greater level of skill or ability. Like oftentimes that's mathematics, right? Calculus doesn't have an obvious application until you learn, how you use a derivative to
I love derivatives and
conclude
integrals.
something, right?
Not really.
Yeah, right. I mean, and some things are in the abstract until you get some concrete way of using them, but a lot of things, right, aren't. So that being said, that's my tip. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. My studying to me was, and I think too, studying to most students, and I would say I would generalize this, but most students is going to be different to what studying should be. Because to me, I feel like most of my students study for the short term. They almost study it for the purpose of the test and nothing more. And then once they turn in the test, everything that they just studied goes right out the window. And to me, studying is learning, which is going to lead to long-term understanding. And it's not going to go right out the window right after the test. So to me, it is a long-term understanding of something that is going to stay with me. There's a lot of stuff in high school that still sticks with me today. Like one of the things that is baffling to a lot of people, and I can't say this, I can do it 100% because I know I can't right now, but I can still do the periodic table. I can still, show you where I would say if I had to grade myself, I bet you I can get 75% of the periodic table without looking at it, showing you where the different elements are because of a good teacher and a good study tip that they gave me. And so, and that was 20 years ago.
Well, let me tell you something, and I think you'll probably echo that you've seen this as well. When you talk about lots of times our students study for the exam and then they forget it afterwards. I mean, there's some research out there that shows that students forget 90% of what they learn in classes within 3 months after that class. And I fully believe that. I think 90% might be a conservative estimate. But one group that doesn't is our non-traditional students.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, they don't make the best grade in the class, right? They may make an A or they'll make a low A or a B or something like that. But they internalize the material so much better than our traditional students. And I've spent a lot of time, talking with them, trying to figure out why that is, right? Why does it seem like they care so much more? Why do they have such a better working knowledge or foundational understanding of this and how it applies in the world? Well, there's two things that come from that. One, it's they've seen aspects of it before. So now that they're hearing in real life, right, in the work world or in their personal life, and then when they're hearing it in class, it resonates. It has a reason they're engaged. So it's actually not the first time they've seen it. It's just the first time it's been explained to them. So it's being explained to them in a different way, right? There was a shocking event that made it matter. They were engaged. And then we go into explaining it to them. They have questions. They want to clarify. They have some context for how it applies. And they may not focus as hard on just knowing it to get the right answer on the test, right? Like some of the other students do, but which normally they do quite well. But if you ask them the same question 3 months later, they would have so much better understanding of that concept and of that topic. That's why I'm such a huge proponent of the work study programs or doing cooperative learning or part-time learning. In a perfect world, if college took everybody 8 years to complete, but you worked, full-time for half of the year or more than half of the year, or worked part-time all the way throughout, and you progressed in a career the same way, right? Maybe through a job sharing type program or something where you could still earn money, support your life, support your family, those type of things, but continue to learn while you're engaged in the content at the same time. I think it would just be so much more impactful to students. But of course, I'm going off on a rant about my ideas of the perfect educational environment.
Well, I think it's interesting you say that because, one, our next episode, we're dealing with the work, school, personal life balance and how to balance all of that together. And I think our students, what you're saying is in a perfect world, they would work full-time part of the year. for our students, at least, a large percentage of our students do work full time. But the problem is
They
that
do.
it's taking away from other things. So they may work full time, and then they're also going to school full time, and they're also have a family that have to, and when you have all of that put together, some things start to take a hit. And so,
Yeah.
that I understand what you're saying, but the way, like I said, in our school right now, they do that, but it's not because it's an option, it's almost a necessity.
Right. And structurally, our system's not set up for what I'm saying,
Yeah.
right? School's not set up like that for the most part, except for some of your engineering programs, your cooperative style of program. But also, the work world's not set up like
That's true.
that. I mean, we're changing now more than ever, right? You're starting to see that job sharing model, the remote work type scenario. But there's always more money, more benefits, more resources for more working. And when you put a student there and say balance these two, and you have a life and you want to have the resources to do the things in the time you want in life, and you realize that from work, more resources come, and then school's the one that's costing you, not actually bringing resources to you, which one are you going to skimp on? Right? School begins to take a back seat. Work takes the foreground, in terms of above school at least, so it supports life and things like that. So it makes it very difficult. That's why, I'm conflicted there in saying, we should have this mandatory of balancing the two, because how do you keep that in balance? But of course, that's what we get to talk about on our next episode, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, let's get into our top tips. Again, we'll just go back and forth, and I'm sure some of ours will coincide with each other, and it'll probably be a little bit quicker this time because we have some questions towards the end that I really want to get to. But my first tip, and this is my biggest tip, this is what I tell every one of my students, and I made sure this was the first one on my list. That is, take the time to figure out what you do and what you don't know. And that's a hard one. But if you do that, it'll let you know what areas you need to focus more time on the stuff that you do know. And when I say you do know, I mean not memorized it, but you actually understand it and can do it with no problem and with confidence. You don't need to spend that much time on that. You just need to focus on the stuff that you don't know. And if you can't identify that, then you're going to be spinning your wheels on some of this stuff. You're going to be wasting time. And so it's all about efficiency. So I give this example. When you're dealing with math or some type of math class, don't go home right after the class and do a problem out of the book with your book and your notes next to you and assume that if you got the problem right, you're good to go. Because you just got out of class, you have the book and the notes next to you. Of course, you're going to get it right. Everything's fresh on your mind. You've got the book to go back to. But then when you get to the test, you've lost it because you didn't really have it. It was just everything was fresh on your mind. So my advice to you would be, when you go to class and you talk about some kind of subject, math subject, and you do a problem, give yourself a day to forget what's fresh on your mind. Then do a problem with no book, no notes, and do it from start to finish. Don't stop. Don't go, I don't know how to do this problem, so I got to go back to the book. But do it from start to finish, and then check yourself. That'll let you know what portions of the steps that you do know and what portions you don't know. I've had many students come to my office, and they'll do a problem from start to finish, and I will watch them do, and it would be like a 2-part problem, and I'll watch them do it wrong, and they'll spend 30 minutes doing this problem, and I'll watch them do it wrong, but I won't say anything. And then what we found out was they didn't know how to do the first part of the problem, but they knew how to do the second part of the problem, which needed the information from the first part. So we were able to identify, hey, you need to really focus in on this top part. You need to understand the first part because you've got the second part. And that, to me, once I figured that out, man, it changed my studying patterns a ton.
That makes a lot of sense.
You got one?
Yeah. My number one is more, I guess, the hyperbolic statement here. You have to read. I've heard people say all the time that I don't like to read. I'm more of an auditory learner and things
That's
like
me.
that.
I've said that many times.
Right.
You're talking to me.
But one, research has shown that's not true. Okay. That everyone who reads, if you actually read it in an engaged manner, instead of just skimming it or telling yourself that I hate reading this. But if you read it, there is no one out there who can recall the same material better having it read to them or told to them than they can reading it. It's just not the way our minds work, right? And so even writing something down, taking notes, if you read it and then take notes, what I see with most people is they abhor the reading part of it. They don't like it. So they skim through it. They halfway do it or put little effort into it. They're not engaged. They don't take notes while they're reading. So they're not putting things together. And granted, reading, I like to say it like this. When it comes to learning, it's just like sports. I played a lot of sports growing up, and there was two types of practice. There was the painful, hurtful practice that you did not enjoy. It was just skill-based, and you were doing it to get better, and getting better in any way that was hard.
That was 4
right?
out of the 5 days of practice.
Yeah, right. I mean, it was just skill-based, monotonous. This is awful, but I know it will translate into performance. And then there was playing the sport for fun. So to compare the two, right, you're getting better at one. You're getting better at both of them, and you can learn just by spending the time playing. But that directed study, that directed practice, the type of stuff you read about in books like Talent is Overrated or Outliers, right? The concept of directed practice, same way with directed study. Reading is more, if you do it in an engaged way, is more directed study. The listening and trying to take in is more passive. So you cannot learn as well by listening to somebody else. It's just like typing versus writing. You will retain something better if you write it than if you type it. Just because you have to a certain extent, commit it to memory. It's the way you have to process it. So that being said, no matter how much you hate it, learn to deal with it. Learn to do it effectively. Read the material, take notes on it. Because the idea that you can learn enough of the material by just listening in class or taking notes in class is a fallacy. I mean, I've taken notes in class all my life, right? And never has anything I've heard in class or the notes I've taken in class been anything more than a shallow summary of what you get from the reading material that you're assigned. So that being said, plain and simple, it may not be what people want to hear, and it may run contradictory to things you've told yourself all your life, but you have to read, and no one learns better by listening than they do reading.
I feel like I'm being personally attacked.
I'm sorry, AJ. I don't mean to personally attack you, but
matter of fact, I have to go change one of my tips now.
So I want to beat that into the heads of anybody who's out there listening right now. There's nothing you can't learn, but there are things that you can't learn without reading.
Yeah, I mean, I could see value in that. Now I will say there are different learning disabilities that people have that.
Sure.
Because I know I have a learning disability when it comes to reading, where my comprehension level is very low. So when I read, I don't comprehend near what I do when I hear something. So that's why I always said that I was better from an auditory standpoint. But I also do think I used that in a very young age as an excuse not to read, which then also hindered my practice and my ability to further my comprehension level to a certain degree. But again, I felt like that was a personal attack, so that kind of hurt.
Sorry about that, AJ. Mm-hmm. But like I say, I had to make it resonate. You know, one of those
what makes sense.
Shocking statements that gets people's attention.
Sure. Well, my tip number 2, and I said this a little bit in the last episode, but it's important for you to understand the differences between studying the hows and the whys, and then also understanding when one is more important than the other. So there is a difference between understanding how to do something. So, for instance, in math, 2 + 2 = 4. It's showing you how to get from point A to point B. But a lot in accounting is why we do what we do. Why do we consider this? And I'm going to use some accounting terminology. So if you've never had accounting, then this is probably not going to mean a whole lot to you, but you'll get the idea. In accounting, it's not necessarily always about how we record it, but it's about why we record it. Why did we consider this a revenue and not something else, or an expense and not something else, versus just simply how to do it? Because if you only learn how to do it and the problem changes, then you're done. You don't understand the meaning behind it. You just know how to do that one type of entry. And that's different for each one, because again, some classes, how to do something is more important than you really needing to know why. Again, for history, what happened in a certain year is going to be more important than necessarily, or might be more important than why for the purpose of the exam or whatnot. So again, it's understanding the difference between the two and also understanding when one is more important than the other. That would be my tip too.
That's an excellent tip, and I agree with that one 100% as well.
All right, so what are you going to personally attack me with now?
Well, everything kind of goes back to what I said. A lot of my tips collapse back in that first one, right? I'll go ahead and throw out there. My tip number 3 was, class should only be used to reinforce what you've already read. You can't learn it there. But I guess since I've already said that one, I'll cut my list down, right?
Oh, good.
And go to, you've got to, when you're reading, you need to break down your reading into small parts. One of the biggest mistakes I see with students, they read the whole chapter, start to finish, and they don't stop. That's a huge error. Break the reading down into sections, paragraphs, small portions, and go ahead and make your notes on that. If you need to walk away after a small section, make your notes, walk away, come back, read the next section, right? Type scenario. Breaking it into those small chunks, usually by concept, by individual concept. And then looking at it holistically at the end where you've got everything broken down into these little concepts will help you so much more. And granted, that applies maybe perhaps less in literature, right, where you have one single story or poem or something like that than you're reading than it does in, say, something very procedural like, the steps in recording journal entries, right? You might have to do this first part, get that down before you move on to the next portion. But if you can do that, right, to the best of your ability, break it down by concept and solidify your understanding of that concept before you move on to the next one.
I couldn't have timed that more perfect with my third tip, because my third tip is don't overstudy in the sense of don't spend a long continuous time studying for something. Break it up into pieces, take breaks in between. I kind of look at it as a computer. You want to give your brain the opportunity to organize your memory hard drive.
Yeah.
10 1-hour study sessions is always going to be better than one 10-hour study session.
No question. I think we talked about before pulling an all-nighter. And
yes, I know that very well.
And I have never pulled an all-nighter. I mean, obviously that comes down to preparation and everything, but I realized spending all night reading stuff for hours on end, I would just stop recording, right? Things would not stay in my memory. So it was useless to me, or at least I felt like it was. So it didn't work. I needed to study for an hour and sleep on it, or study for an hour and spend the rest of the day doing something else, right? Or something unrelated in that way, and then come back to it the next day.
All right, well, let's do one more. So you'll do one and I'll do one. You got another one?
Yes. And this comes down to skill-based stuff, right? Figure out different processes that you can attack something. Oftentimes you can ask your professor their opinion on how they would go about studying for this stuff. But sometimes your best study method is during the creating of your notes process. Right? Sometimes it's the best study process is saying, okay, if I'm creating these notes or I'm creating this outline, and if you don't know what an outline is, it's basically you take all the material and you put it into, same heading formats and stuff, but you're just bulleting the information below it. Sometimes creating the flashcards, for example, I was never a big flashcard person, but when you're creating the flashcards, actually writing down that definition on one side and writing down that vocabulary term on the other, right? That is your study. That is when you're studying. After you're done creating the flashcards, you might not need to go through them but once or twice, and you've got it because you did so much work in learning it when you're creating it. Diagrams, creating your acronyms, all of that, everything that goes into your studying process, that is not just a pre-preparatory stuff. That's why it's not as good for you to buy an outline or to buy prefab notes or to buy study cards and things like that as it is for you to make your own. Because that making process, that creating, is an integral part, maybe the most important part of your studying process.
Yeah, mnemonic devices was big for me. You're talking about acronyms, but just mnemonic devices. Shout out to Miss Owsley, my chemistry teacher that taught me the periodic table using mnemonic devices. That's how I still remember most of it to this day.
Yeah, they work. In law school, we used them all the time, right? I mean, I can still when I teach people what adverse possession is, like that CHOANE model, chone, right? It's
I don't know that one,
that
but
makes it stick. That makes
yeah,
it stick.
I can think. All I can think of the one that comes to mind is the first column on the periodic table is Hellenic Rubsesfer, HELINA KRBCSFR. Maybe I can't remember that last one. Like I said, I could get about 70% of it. She'd be disappointed. I should know that.
Well, there you go, AJ. 20-some years later, and you still got it.
Yeah, there you go. My last one is a little bit contrary to what all the other ones that we've been talking about. And that is, it has everything to do with strategy. You know, I love strategy. I put strategy into everything. Along with studying all of your notes and all the information for the exam, also study the exam structure. Devise a plan that's going to give you an edge when you go in there to take this exam. Because just as much as it is important to know the information, it's also important to understand what's going to be presented in front of you. So for instance, and this is what I use for my students right now, is if you're going to be given a timed exam that's going to be all multiple choice, and you know that there's going to be quantitative and qualitative questions in there, you need to devise a strategy that's going to help with your time management. So what I would do, and what I did, is I would use maybe the first 10 minutes of the test, and I'm going to go through and read all of them I can, or all of them, and I'm going to knock out all the questions that I can answer immediately within a few seconds after reading them. No calculation, nothing like that. It's just I'm going to just try to go through and bust as many as I can within that first time period. That way I'm saving up all the time towards the end. Then I'm going to take a second pass at it, and then I'm going to do all the calculations that I know how to do. So it's going to take me a little bit of time, but I know how to do them. There's no question I know how to do them. And then once I do that, I'm going to take a third pass and do the more challenging questions, and so on until I finish up the test. That's going to give me a good time management system that's going to help me take what the exam has given me and use it to my advantage.
Those are great points, AJ. Excellent.
Well, let's look at some of these other questions, because like I said, I love some of these other questions that we have on the show doc. Is it possible to become a better or more skilled studier?
Absolutely. There's no question. Honestly, as bad as this sounds, too many people believe that they are great learners or great students, or somehow bad learners or bad students. And it's just based upon their study habits, not upon their ability in any way. If you practice, if you figure out ways of approaching different types of topics, you will get better at it, which ultimately will improve your performance in classes, and it will give you the confidence to take on new things. It'll make you want to learn things more, because you'll see the success by the somewhat skewed, oftentimes, metrics by which we measure whether you learn or understand something. So my answer is a resounding yes. You can get to be a better studier through diligent effort and practice. Now, it's not the fun type of practice that I made reference to earlier.
It's that painful.
It's not the playing of tennis. It's the practicing the backhand over and over and over a million times, right? It's that directed study that's going to make you better. So the answer, resounding yes.
So for me, that quote, there's a quote that comes into my mind. Do you know the definition of insanity?
Repeating the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Exactly. And I think
Albert Einstein.
I think this has a lot to do that from somebody who all have growing up and when I first got into college, using the excuse, well, I didn't know how to study, so I'm just not a good studier. I use that as the excuse of what's even the point of me trying to do better or try to improve my studying skills if I'm always going to be that. And my grades took a hit, and I thought, well, eventually it's going to get better, but I kept doing the same thing, expecting my grades to get better, and it really didn't. Until I started associating with people who I saw to be good studiers. When you start to find people, and again, it kind of goes back into that mentoring thing too, you have peer mentors. And so if you can find somebody who is a good studier in your classes or in your college career, befriend them. See if they'll help you improve those skills. If you're like me, marry them. That's what I did. That was my way in. I was like, hey, can you help me with studying? And also, do you want to go see a movie?
You can't do that for every class.
You can't do that for every class.
There are laws against that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But yeah, I do think it's possible because I'm a living testament to it can be. Are there any study tactics that you think are complete garbage and you should avoid?
Yes. The one that has been constantly disproven, which I actually tried it for a while, I was obsessed with learning other languages, and I would put on headphones at night and go to sleep while listening to
I know what you're talking about.
Foreign radio and things. There is no passive way to learn in that way.
So you mean you can't sleep with your textbook under your pillow and just
that does not work. Just having that on in the background, just passively soaking in. Yeah, that's all garbage.
That seems like a good concept for a pyramid scheme.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's about what it is, a pyramid scheme.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, I couldn't think of one until you said that, and I was like, yeah, that one, I've heard that many times. Just sleep with your book. Was it osmosis that you'll get it from?
Yeah.
Well, this has been an entertaining show. And we, sadly, we have other questions that I'd like to answer, but maybe we can get onto another episode dealing with studying, because I think, again, this is such a big topic for students and is something that they want to hear about. So, it's been fun. The next episode, we're going to be talking about something that I took a lot of effort in, probably more than studying and note-taking, which I probably shouldn't have, but that is the personal life, work, school balance. And how to really balance that and get the most out of all of those. Because, if you put all of your efforts into one, then something else is going to be taking a hit. So that's what we're going to be talking about next episode. Jason, you got anything before we leave? Just remind everybody, we're here for you guys. Tell us what you want to hear about. Drop us some comments on our social media handles or through our website. We'll talk about them, right? If you've got success stories, bring them up. We'll celebrate with you. Awesome. Well, y'all have a good one. We'll see you next time. Goodbye. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd Podcast. Be sure to head over to reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.